We've been working our way through the book of Psalms over the last maybe 2 years, and we've arrived today at Psalm 106. And Psalm 106 has some similarities with Psalm 105 that we read last week, in that it's basically a historic psalm talking about the things that God has done for his people. It takes Israel's history and uses that excuse me, to illustrate God's steadfast love in the face of Israel's rebellion and unfaithfulness. And in that regard, Israel's not much different to us. If we're honest, we're rebellious and we're often unfaithful. The psalm begins by calling on the people of God to give thanks and praise to God. And Daryl's going to read that part in the first 3 verses.
Praise the Lord. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. Who can proclaim the mighty acts of the Lord, who declares his praise? Or declares his praise. Blessed are those who act justly, who always do what is right.
So, the Lord is just. And following this section, there's about another 40 verses that give countless examples of people's sin. I mean, we could probably go on forever giving examples of people's sin. We're not going to read the full 40 verses, we're just going to look at a few examples that Caroline's going to read.
When our ancestors were in Egypt, they gave no thought to your miracles. They did not remember your many kindnesses, and they rebelled by the sea, the Red Sea. But they soon forgot what he had done and did not wait for his plan to unfold. At Horeb they made a calf and worshipped an idol cast from metal. They exchanged their glorious God for an image of a bull which eats grass. They forgot the God who saved them, who had done great things in Egypt. They grumbled in their tents and did not obey the Lord. They mingled with the nations and adopted their customs. They worshipped their idols, which became a snare to them. They sacrificed their sons and their daughters to false gods.
So, God punished them by handing them over to their enemies. And the psalm ends with a prayer that God, who has shown just patience to his people all along, will once again rescue them. Susan.
Save us, Lord our God, and gather us from the nations, that we may give thanks to your holy name and glory in your praise. Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, from everlasting to everlasting. Let all the people say,
Amen.
Amen. Praise the Lord.
Well, that's some inspirational stuff there. I guess there are always times when we're rebellious and unfaithful. And at times like that, it's very easy to give up. And sometimes you might even say, gee, I wonder if I was ever really a Christian at all to start with. But once God's Holy Spirit is with you, once you can say, Jesus is Lord, you are saved. And even though you might have dull times, God is there to rescue you. So we need to go forward as victorious Christian soldiers. So would you stand and sing with us, Onward Christian Soldiers? They can march around the church if they want to, yes. Please take a seat. Okay, it's kids' time. Do we have kids today? One. Oh, wow. All right, well, would our kids like to come down the front?
Oh, okay. It's a good thing you're here. I'm going to come and sit beside you, as there's no other kids. So, how are things? Good? Yeah, they're okay. I hear you've had a new nephew in the last couple of days. Is that right? How come? Wow. What's your new bedroom like?
Two beds and the dog sleeps on the bottom.
Dogs are not.
fun moving all your things back into that pink bedroom? Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
And you've been at school this week? Yeah? Is that going okay? What was the favouriteest thing that you did this week at school?
We did art.
You want to talk about art? You good at art?
Yeah.
I'm really hopeless at art, so I'm glad to know that you're good at it. What was your art project?
We did like 6 squares with circles inside of them with different colours around the circles going into the middle.
Sounds a bit like an Olympic scheme, does it? Is it like that? No. Circles with colours. Sounds nice. So, what could we pray for you this week? All these grown-ups love to pray for the kids in our church. So, what would you like them to pray for you this week? Okay. Oh, I think we might just pray that you represent the Lord Jesus well at school. Would that be all right? Yeah. Okay, so would you pray with me then? Caitlin, Father, thank you that Caitlin's here this morning, and thank you that she's had the opportunity to live in a loving new picture at your house. And we would ask that as she goes to school this week, that you would give her opportunities to represent the Lord Jesus, and that she might do that well. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right? Thanks, Caitlin. I think you and the crowds of children that are going to ride can go out with Caroline. All right? Thanks, hon.
And Caroline is now going to bring us the announcements. Announcement.
I think that's better. We have had such a busy month in February. So March a little bit slower. Something very, well, I don't know if it's important, but it's really good fun, is Live is happening this month in 2 weeks' time. So if you haven't been before, come along. If you have, come back and bring a friend. It's on the 19th of March at 2 o'clock. Come along for some good music and some afternoon tea.
And the day after church, we're having our monthly prayer time where we're going to gather up in that back corner after you've had some morning tea. Excuse me, it'll be very brief, probably 10 or 15 minutes. If you have things you want to pray about, you can do that. If you have trouble thinking of things to pray about, Susan, who's very well prepared, will have little slips to hand out to you so you can pray about those things. That'll be here after morning tea. And now Ben's going to bring us an announcement.
These two announcements are rather sad announcements. Those who remember John and Carol Bowman, who used to go to church here, John passed away peacefully last Thursday night. His funeral will be on Friday the 13th over at Cessnock. I'll send out an email about it as well. And also in Canberra on Easter Saturday, they're holding a combined memorial service for Don and Betty Idle. But once again, I'll include that in the email. But I think we need to pray for Carol and the family. As John, we often say it now, it's good that in one way he's gone home because he's not going to be in any more pain. So it was a great blessing in many, many ways.
We've been hearing about God's great love for us. This next song starts off with these words. Father, you loved me. You sent your Son to redeem. Jesus, you washed me. By your blood, I am clean. Would you stand and sing with us, Heavenly Father?
Jesus, you wash me by your blood and
Take a seat. We're going to come now to a time of prayer. So let's just bow our heads and bring our thoughts to God. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks that when a group of us are gathered together, that you do hear our prayers and that you grant our requests. Lord, we acknowledge that you are a great and wonderful and powerful God. Father, we acknowledge your love for us and your extreme patience as you deal with us in times of our sin and falling away. But Father, we give you thanks for the gift of your Son Jesus, that through his blood we are redeemed, we are saved, and one day we will be with you in heaven. We just praise you so much for that grace, Father. Lord, we remember those people who have suffered loss recently. We think of those that Len just mentioned. And Father, in our hearts, we just ask that you would comfort those who are left behind, that you would help us to rejoice in the knowledge that there is a better life in heaven. And Father, we just thank you for the reassurance of that better life. Father, we give you thanks for the rain that has come recently. And Lord, we prayed for that. And Father, we give you thanks that you have sent it so abundantly. And not just one great, huge downpour, but steady rain over a period of time. Father, we pray for the situation of the coronavirus. Lord, we have some people panicking and buying stuff in supermarkets. We have other people saying it's no worse than the ordinary flu. Lord, we just ask that you would calm our hearts, that you would give peace and reason in this time. Father, we pray for those who lead us. We pray for Scott Morrison, who has the responsibility of leading a country, but also has the responsibility of representing you, because he is known for his Christian faith. Father, we ask that you would give him wisdom and that you would give him godly wisdom. Lord, we pray for those who govern us locally, and we pray for the people who run this church and lead us here. We pray especially for Lynn and Sue and ask that your hand continues to be on them, that you would continue to look after them and give them wisdom and love in their hearts as they lead us in this church. I'm just going to pause now for about 1 minute where you can bring your own personal requests to God, and then I'll close. Father, your great love for us is beyond our understanding. Father, what you've done for us at Calvary is beyond our comprehension. And Lord, we just give you thanks that you have called us to be your people. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's acknowledge Jesus' great love for us as we sing together the song, Jesus, Thank You.
Would you like to stand and join us?
That's the hardest part. Okay, we heard from the psalmist what he thought about sin. He described lots of different sins that the people of Israel had committed. And if I were to ask you what you thought about sin, you might say something like, well, sin is bad things like murder, adultery, covetousness, stealing. Don't do those things, Jesus can save you. Or you might say something like this: sin will hurt you like an illness will destroy your body. Sin will take over your life like demons take over somebody's life or make them do terrible things. Sin will isolate you from your community, from your family, even from your God, because you can't go to temple. Sin will isolate you like someone who has leprosy. Sin is pervasive, destructive, deadly. Which one of those is more effective? The last one? Does the last one bring to you some idea of the pervasiveness, the horror of sin? Well, that's what Jesus was doing in chapter 1 of Mark. He was telling us that sin is like an illness or a demon or like leprosy. But we know that Jesus can overcome because we saw him in chapter 1 healing illness and casting out demons and cleansing from leprosy, so that we know that Jesus can heal. But he told us something really, really important in chapter 1, at verse 38. He said that he had come not so much to heal, because he was walking away from opportunities to heal. He had come to preach the gospel. Jesus spells out that that's why he came. He came to preach. And so the healings and the castings out and the leprosy being cleansed, those things are illustrations of Jesus dealing with sin. That's the theme, the big theme that I think is going to continue all the way through Mark's Gospel. So didn't he care about the individuals that he healed? Were they just teaching aids? No. Jesus was compassionate. The Bible says that again and again and again. Jesus felt compassion. But even more than healing the individual, Jesus was telling us, this is what I came to do. I came to heal. So we're going to begin chapter 2 by listening to Mary read, first of all, from Mark chapter 2 and the beginning. Thanks, Mary.
Jesus forgives and heals a paralysed man. A few days later, when Jesus again entered Capernaum, the people heard that he had come home. They gathered in such large numbers that there was no room left, not even outside the door, and he preached the word to them. Some men came, bringing to him a paralysed man carried by 4 of them. Since they could not get him to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus by digging through it, and then they lowered the mat the man was lying on. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralysed man, Son, your sins are forgiven.
What? I'll fix you, just wait.
There's a bit more to Mary's reading, and that's it.
Now some teachers of the law were sitting there, thinking to themselves, why does this fellow talk like that? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone? Immediately Jesus knew in his spirit that this was what they were thinking in their hearts. And he said to them, "Why are you thinking these things? Which is easier to say to this paralysed man, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Get up, take up your mat and walk'? But I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." So he said to the man, "I tell you, get up, take your mat and go home." He got up, took his mat and walked out in full view of them all. This amazed everyone, and they praised God, saying, "We have never seen anything like this."
So this is the first of 4 episodes we've got in chapter 2, where Jesus encounters a situation and he does something about it. I want to introduce you to John, who's walking and leaping and bouncing with joy. So John, the paralysis is all gone?
Yes. Jesus healed me, but I've got to give credit where credit's due. I've got to give credit to my friends who actually lowered me down through the roof and right at his feet, quite literally.
Well, why did they do that? Why didn't they just take you to Jesus?
Well, we heard that Jesus was preaching at Capernaum and was at Pete's house again. And you'll remember that that's where Jesus had previously healed Peter's mother-in-law. And anyway, while Jesus was preaching inside the house, the good news about the gospel, a great crowd gathered. And then my 4 friends arrived carrying me.
And then what happened?
Then my microphone fell off. And the place was really packed. So they couldn't get me in through the door. So they were pretty smart. They climbed up on the roof and made a hole. Someone else's house, but it doesn't matter. They made a hole and lowered me through, right to Jesus' feet.
Was that what you expected?
No, not really.
Okay. So what did Jesus actually say?
Well, I thought he'd say something like, "Be healed, get up and walk, carry your mat," all that sort of stuff. But that's not what happened. Instead, he just said to me, "Your sins are forgiven."
Did it work?
Well, yes, see, they both work. But I'll tell you what, it sure upset the scribes and the Pharisees. They said that only God could forgive sin. So Jesus didn't have the right to even say that my sins were forgiven.
I wonder why Mark made such a point of emphasising your particular healing.
Well, I don't really know, but it might be because he's just shown that sin has many different facets. So casting out demons, healing the sick, cleansing the lepers, they were all pictures of the way that Jesus deals with sin. With me, he healed by forgiving my sin. I think he underlined the idea that sin should be taken seriously when he told me my sin was forgiven. Although he was dealing with me individually and my individual needs, I think Jesus was always also demonstrating to all the people around that forgiveness is a picture of how he would deal with sin.
So what was it that upset the scribes and the Pharisees?
Everything upsets the scribes and the Pharisees. But what upset them on this occasion was that Jesus forgave my sin. He actually, you see, he was claiming to be God, because we know this from Psalm 103, that only God can forgive sin. So when Jesus actually said, "I forgive your sins," he's claiming to be God. And, Jesus was actually giving them, the scribes, the Pharisees, the chance to understand who he was.
I guess healing you so that you could get up and walk was pretty difficult, but even more difficult was to forgive your sin, because they couldn't see that that's what actually happened. So they needed to see you walking to know that the sin was actually forgiven. Is that what happened?
Yes, I think so.
Well, you said they learned a lot and gained a lot from this encounter with Jesus. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Okay. Now let's talk about healing. I sense congregation this morning, lots of questions about healing. Perhaps if you listen very carefully, you'll hear one of those questions now.
Did Jesus mean that every case of affliction results from sin?
No, definitely not. Definitely not. A couple of things in the Gospels that you can go to if you want to check it out. John 9, remember the man that was born blind? And they asked who sinned, this man or his parents, because this amount of sin must equal this amount of suffering. And Jesus said, no, not at all. And, not but and, God's going to be glorified. If you put a but in there, it makes it as though God were making the man to be born blind so that he could get glory. Jesus is saying, no, he is born blind and God will be glorified through it. See the difference? Really important little conjunction there. Okay, and in Luke 13 there's a story of, remember the Tower of Siloam fell on some people and they were killed? And some other people had gone to the temple to worship, and Herod got a bit crazy that day and ordered them slain, and so their blood mingled with the sacrifices. And they said, well, those people who died in that situation, were they worse than other people because they suffered so much? And again Jesus said, no. And, again, not but and, you should be careful, because you never know when your life is going to end. So, no, definitely not. It's not this amount of sin equals this amount of suffering. Not at all. Absolutely no way. What it is that these things happen and God can be glorified. I wonder if there's another question out there.
Can God heal?
What do you reckon, folks? Can God heal? Yes. Absolutely. Don't need to say anything else. We believe that. God can and does heal.
So does God heal today?
Yes. Does he? Yes. Does he always heal? No. Okay. So, when the psalmist says, praise the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits, for he forgives all your sins. Does he do that? And heals all your diseases. Does he do that? Yes, but not necessarily at the same time. There might be a little bit of a time gap there, okay? Is there another question out there?
Is faith necessary for healing?
What do you think? Do you think there has to be faith? Was there faith? Did our friend John have faith when he was lowered down? Did he do anything special? No, but his friends did. His friends did. That was faith, wasn't it? Because the account that Mary read to us says, seeing their faith, Jesus healed them. So people express faith in different ways. But some of us brought up in a tradition where it's easy to say, praise the Lord, and the Lord did this for me. Some people have grown up in traditions where that's not what you say, that's taken as arrogance. Some people express their faith very, very differently. But there will be faith, whether you see it or not, and whether it's expressed at that time or not. And in fact, it doesn't really matter whether it goes faith, healing, or healing, faith, does it? There will be faith. Well, is that all the questions, or have you got another one up there?
Well, I've got a couple more.
Okay.
So, didn't miracles suddenly disappear after the apostolic age?
A lot of people think that. Close the Bible, ended miracles. A lot of people think that and teach that. One thing that I think a verse that informs on is really important. Miracles were God's way of authenticating the true ministry of genuine apostles during the early days of the church, because before the Bible was written down and completed, false teachers were a very great threat, because there was nothing to say, yes, this is right because it says this, and no, this is wrong because it says that. And so the miracles authenticated the teaching. Does that make sense? Yep. And Paul in 2 Corinthians 12:12 says that he persevered in demonstrating amongst the Corinthians the marks of a true apostle. Look, including signs and wonders and miracles. He is demonstrating by the miracles that he performed that he was a true apostle.
So, does God will to heal all those who truly come to him in faith?
Some people say yes, and if you're not healed, then it's because there's sin in your life, or you don't have enough faith. So you better feel guilty as well as sick. Some people say yes, and if it's not happening, it's your fault. Is that right?
No.
Some people say, no, the age of miracles has passed, but we've just seen that that's not so. That miracles had a special purpose in scriptures. They're clustered at the time of an outpouring of new revelation. They have a special place in scriptures, and they occur, but not always when we say, God, I'd like a miracle right now. So, some important questions. I'm lost, Andrew. Thanks. I want you to meet Johnny. She's one of my heroes, and I can see a lot from a lot of you that you know the story of Johnny. As a young teenager, she dove into shallow water, broke a neck, and has spent the last 60-something years in a wheelchair. So if anyone's got the right to speak about suffering, she has, hasn't she? Did her faith waver occasionally? Did she ever get impatient or upset with God? Occasionally. But she says the thing that she learned after all that time in the wheelchair is that God deserves the right to heal or not as he sees fit. We need to be careful about bolding up to God and demanding a healing. That's in God's hands. And she often quotes this verse from the hymn, I am not skilled to understand what God has willed, what God has planned. I only know at my right hand stands one who is my Saviour. And Joan goes on to say that in her suffering, and this is a good thing for us to learn about the things that we suffer, she prays for grace to bear it, strength to bear it, grace to benefit from it, and devotion to offer it up to God as a sacrifice of praise. I understand strength to bear it. I understand grace to benefit from it. I'm still thinking about devotion to offer it up to God as a sacrifice of praise. That's a step a lot further on, isn't it? Such prayers are a way for me to know God deeper, higher, richer, wider, and fuller than possible in comfort. And that's true, isn't it? To this point, he has chosen not to heal me, but to hold me. So Johnny has a lot to teach us about suffering. Last question.
So why does Jesus do this really public healing here when in chapter 1 he imposed silence about who he was on both the demons and the man healed of leprosy?
Jesus is a secret. It's strange, isn't it? In one situation he says, don't tell anyone. And in another situation, he performs a miracle in front of huge crowds. Of course the word's going to get out. Well, what was different here? Well, now was the time the mission was going to be launched. Jesus was making a public statement about who he was because only God can heal sin. Also, the man had a big support group, didn't he? His friends had done something quite outrageous. There were lots of witnesses, And the scribes and Pharisees were there because Jesus knew that he was heading into a time of confrontation between himself and the scribes and Pharisees, the very people that you would expect would have supported Jesus. They were standing against him. So that's why at the beginning of chapter 2 we have this much longer account of a miracle of healing. It was the right time. God always does things at the right time, doesn't he? Okay. Mary.
When Jesus went out beside the lake, a large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him.
I want you to meet Daryl. Daryl is a Jew working in Capernaum. And Daryl, you've recently changed jobs. Who did you used to work for?
I was an official in the service of Herod Antipas, the tetrarch of Galilee, and that gave me the right to collect taxes.
Collect taxes. I bet that made you really popular with the Jews.
Yeah, hardly. Certainly not the most popular guy in town, but I made a good living. I could collect not only what the Jews owed Rome, but also a bit extra from my pocket.
So why did you throw all of that in? You were getting rich, it was going well. Why did you chuck it in?
Jesus said, "Follow me," you know, and I really wanted to get to know him better and introduce him to my friends, so I invited him home for dinner.
You had Jesus at your house.
Yeah.
So how did the scribes and the Pharisees react to that?
They were offended.
Why? Why were they offended?
Because the opposition increased and led eventually to the arrest and execution of Jesus.
Yes. So that's,
Okay.
yeah. Okay. Thanks, Daryl. So this is the second incident that happens in chapter 2. First of all, the paralysed man was healed, and now Levi or Matthew has been called to follow Jesus, and both times the scribes and the Pharisees were upset. We will move on. Thanks, Mary.
From Mark chapter 2, Jesus is questioned about fasting. Now, John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. Some people came and asked Jesus, "How is it that John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees are fasting, but yours are not?" Jesus answered, "How can the guests of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? They cannot, so long as they have him with them. But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, and on that day they will fast. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. Otherwise, the new piece will pull away from the old, making the tear worse. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wine will burst the skins, and both the wine and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins."
So I want you to meet Mrs. Scribe. In the future, her descendants will grow up to write church minutes. Right now, she's a scribe. So, Caroline, you're an expert in fasting. How often do the scribes and the Pharisees, how often do you fast?
Well, twice a week, on Mondays and Thursdays.
Do you know how many days, fasting days, were actually prescribed in the Old Testament?
Well, just one, and that was the Day of Atonement.
Okay.
But we wanted to be better than everyone else and really earn God's approval. We actually he pointed that out to Jesus, that since the Pharisees and the disciples of John the Baptist fasted twice a week, Jesus' disciples should do that too.
So why was this an issue with Jesus?
Well, his answer was strange. He said that it would be wrong for his disciples to fast because he brought good news. His companionship with the disciples was as joyous as a wedding feast. And to impose man-made religious observances on this new situation of the gospel is as incongruous as applying a patch of unshrunk cloth to an old garment or pouring unfermented wine into an old, hard, inelastic wineskin, and as disastrous in its result.
So Jesus didn't want his disciples to fast at that time. Will that always be the situation?
No. Jesus said that the day will come when the bridegroom will be taken away violently. Then a life of service and self-denial would be appropriate. In fact, he assumed his hearers would fast and instructed them not to do it for now. Not to do it for show.
Not to do it for show. Well, how did they show fasting? You know?
No.
Okay. Well,
By not eating.
yeah, but they would stand on the, you would stand on the street corners and show how hungry you were. Okay, so did you learn anything from this encounter with Jesus?
Well, in the Old Testament, the bridegroom was an image of God himself.
Yeah.
So Jesus' comment about the bridegroom here may have been claiming to be God.
Right, and we can understand why that would have certainly upset the scribes and the Pharisees. She's got to go, she's got things to write.
Got to go.
Okay, so let's talk just for a moment about fasting. Should Christians today fast? Again, some people say yes, some people say no. Probably the thing we need to consider is that the availability and the time taken to prepare food is very much different today than it was then. The time it took to prepare and bake a loaf of bread was much greater than it was for us to open the cupboard and take out a slice. So the situation has changed. Fasting was definitely used in the Old Testament. It was used to express grief, it was used to express penitence, it was used to show humility, and it was a way of securing God's help. God, this is really important to me. I want to show you how important it is by fasting. The other thing that we ought to consider is that fasting was very cultural. Everybody fasted at one time or another. It was part of their culture. All the different sects and religions and cults fasted. Christians fasted, and Jesus fasted. Remember, he was in the wilderness. It's the only time that fasting, I think, is talked about in relation to Jesus. Christians fasted and remembered that both Elijah and Moses had fasted for 40 days. In Acts, we see the early church fasting before they did important things like choosing their missionaries or choosing their elders. Today we've got all kinds of diets that ask you to fast from certain foods. That is not a spiritual exercise. Paying your doctor is not a spiritual exercise. But if you want to fast in order to focus on God, go ahead. It's not commanded, but it's not prohibited. It's not required, but it's not mandated. Okay. Mary.
One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the cornfields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some ears of corn. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" He answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat, and he also gave some to his companions." Then he said to them, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath.
Well, I want you finally to meet one of Jesus' disciples. And he's going to tell us about the day the Pharisees picked on Jesus because you picked some grain.
Yes, the whole bunch of us were walking through the cornfields, doing what was not allowable on any other day. But the Pharisees classed it as reaping, which was forbidden on the Sabbath. So they pointed out to Jesus that what we were doing was unlawful.
So what did Jesus say?
Jesus quoted what David did, and there's not many greater than King David. And then he said the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath.
What do you think he meant?
I reckon he was pointing out that God's laws were to meet our physical and spiritual needs, not to impose religious restrictions. And that because he is God, he is the one to decide how the Sabbath should be used. And that the Sabbath rest is actually a picture of God's relationship with his people.
Terrific. Thanks very much, disciple of Jesus, follower of Jesus. So, we've seen 4 different confrontations. In each one, Jesus and the scribes and Pharisees are meeting up. And in each one, the opposition to Jesus is increasing. And that's going to be true from now on in Mark's Gospel. So, the opposition grows both to Jesus and to his message, because remember, that's why he came, to preach the gospel. He's a pretty amazing Jesus, isn't he? Do you know him? Thank you.
Well, aren't you glad you don't have to argue with the scribes and the Pharisees? It seems that was a daily occurrence almost in the life of the early church. We don't have to do very much at all these days because Jesus has done it for us. And one of the things that we looked at in the book of Revelation was that even although great tribulation might be coming, it's not really our place to have to get out and do something about that. The battle belongs to the Lord. So would you stand and sing with us these words?
The battle belongs to the Lord.
that we'll be meeting for prayer in this corner after morning tea. Morning tea is served out in the hall. If you're a visitor, please join us and have a talk to some of the people that attend our church. May the Lord be with you and bless you richly. Amen.